Hello, today I will talk about unstructured interviews as a conversational iceberg. But before I talk about it, let me read a beautiful quote from The Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. John Green says, in the best conversations, you don't even remember what you talked about, only how it felt. It felt like we were in some place your body cannot visit, some place with no ceilings and no walls and no floor and no instruments. Unstructured interviews are in depth conversational interviews in which the researcher and participant social interaction develop the substance of the interview through natural and spontaneous conversation. So, we do not impose predetermined categories of questions to lead the conversation. It means there is an extent of flexibility that both researcher and the participant enjoy in the unstructured interview. As I experienced as a researcher and as an anthropologist, conducting unstructured interviews requires more skills and preparation to get engaged in social interactions with the participants. It is a social skill and it requires social and cultural competence to encourage participants to share their stories with the researcher. It is more than holding an interview guide and asking pre-arranged questions with limited and specific probing. Though unstructured interviews require more time and patience, and sometimes more than one session is required to complete the interview, however, the data is rich that includes the personal, experiential, perceptual, and contextual details that are often required to describe, interpret, and contextualize in the narrative studies or phenomenological studies on lived experiences. Another important challenge that a researcher conducting unstructured interviews should seriously take into consideration is the ethical sensitivity involved in unstructured interviews. During unstructured interviews, the participants share their life experiences in a socially comfortable and interactive conversational environment. This may reveal personal and sensitive information comparatively more than the semi structured interviews. Hence, it adds to the researcher's responsibilities to ensure the confidentiality and privacy of the participants and document this process in details in ethical considerations. This also implies that a qualitative researcher intending to use unstructured interviews as a data collection method must be professionally trained and experienced to write details of ethical protocols, manifesting their abilities and planning to grasp the sensitivity and complexity issues related to the unstructured interviews. Now, let me explain how I see unstructured interviews as a conversational iceberg. I use the conversation iceberg metaphor to describe the three layers of conversations in unstructured interviews. The tip of the iceberg is explicit information such as demographic information, everyday life, and the so called plot of the story that the participant is going to share. This part or layer of the conversation interconnects the researcher and participant in a comfort zone to let them go deep into the story of the participants. The next layer, it emerges when the participant starts telling the texture of the story. That includes the description of the incidents and the events that participants have experienced. The third layer, it provides a structural information about the texture. It means the structural information about the description. That is, how did the events and incidents took place. This is the researcher's skill that includes good listening, reflexivity, patience, intelligent probing, attentive body language, and empathy, of course. that how the participant gains an interconnected understanding of these three layers of the conversation iceberg. The researcher must make sense of the conversation in line with the participant's explicit and implicit meaning making process as it emerges in each layer of information. As a social science researcher, we must know that human beings live in a multi layer and complex social world. Like an onion, these layers are stuck together and interconnected with the meanings and meanings of the meanings that are constructed and co constructed in the social world. This is a job of the researcher to peel off each layer and another layer and report the phenomena of interest while revealing the intersectionality of the person environment interactions and subjective experiences embedded in this intersectionality. For good reason, or you can say there are four good reasons that I perceive to choose unstructured interviews when exploring lived experiences. Number one, unstructured interviews are the ideal method to engage in real conversations with the participants without necessarily positioning the researcher in a role of an interviewer with an interview guide. In other words, using unstructured interviews, I get benefit from the power of conversation that opens space for me to get connected with the participant social world through participant stories without any effort to control or interfere with the spontaneity of narratives through predetermined questions. Number two, unstructured interviews give freedom and they provide space for the participant to share their narratives the way they perceive. Also, they can share a lot more other things that may not seem as directly relevant to the researcher's research objectives, but may be a great source of contextual knowledge about the participants' oral stories. Number three, as the researcher is open and flexible in unstructured interviews, he is ready to listen to whatever the participants want to share without restricting them to framed questions. This flexibility and openness benefit the researcher to know more out of the box. Particularly, unstructured interviews are good instruments to collect data on sensitive topics where the researcher needs to listen more, where the researcher needs more space with the participant to understand more. And number four, unstructured interviews offer a detailed participant centered perspective grounded in the thick description of the participants' experiences that are embedded in their social and cultural. Concluding this note, I recommend the unstructured interview method as a useful approach to describe and interpret data in its surface and latent meanings, particularly if the researcher is interested in investigating sensitive and complex phenomena. I hope you will enjoy reading this article, and this video will help you to plan your first unstructured interview. Thank you, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos.